Welcome back. We're still keeping our focus on the COVID and sundry matters. We've got Mr. Abdulrazak Bello Barkindo joining us. He's the head of media of the Nigeria Governors Forum. That's Media and Public Affairs. Good morning. Good to see you again, and thank you for joining us today on the program.
Good morning, Chamberlain. Good morning, the rest of you.
Well, yes, indeed. So much focus on what needs to be done across different states in the country. But let's start off with this one, the COVID. I know that there's still this interstate lockdown, and yes, we're expected to stick to a stricter censor, but it appears as though what we see on paper may be different from what's operational in reality. So what's the impression, what's the thinking at the moment of governors in terms of perhaps how the country, the states, seems to be handling COVID-19 at the moment?
Good morning. I think on a general note, COVID-19 still remains a very crucial and critical part of, our daily living. There has been a shift really from isolations and, lockdowns to herd immunity. What is happening today is that there is a general opening up or a gradual opening up of the economy, especially in terms of manufacturing and agriculture. And, governors have been examining the situation day by day. And last week there was a report by the Governor Okowa Committee, who was mandated to interface with the Presidential Task Force and to see how the nation can ease itself out of the situation. So I think the situation is gradually improving, but COVID is not going away. It's still around. And the most important thing is for everybody to observe the protocols and continue, the new normal.
I mean, originally, the interstate lockdown was an idea from the NGF. But from what we have seen, and that's just a follow-up, from what we have seen so far, obviously, this has been observed in the breach, and I mean, we have it on paper, but in reality, I mean, even for air travels as well. And the big question is this something that you are worried about? And I'm talking about the NGF. And if so, are we going to face reality and say, well, this is not working, let's just remove it altogether or put stricter measures in place?
Yes, I agree with you that it's being observed in the breach. And that is because there are a few bad eggs in the Nigerian police force who do not, live by regular regulations. When this idea was mooted, governors felt that because the federal government restricted movement in 3 areas, that is the FCT, Lagos State, and Ogun State, they felt there was a need to restrict, the spread of the disease. Remember that this disease was brought into this country from another country. And it was observed that by restricting movement in 3 states, there was a likelihood that some people might escape through the few loopholes or windows and get to other states. So state governors decided that all other states should take, their own measures depending on their, capabilities and situations. But over time, there have been complaints. And I remember that the Inspector General of Police had to be invited to come and, explain and, of course, listen to what the governors have to say about the breaches and get him on the same page so that the situation would be ameliorated. But unfortunately, the few bad eggs in the police have run everything down. And this had led to the spike, in the spread of the disease. But so far, I think the controls are coming back in place, even though, we're easing up the situation. But there are certain things that you cannot control, regardless of how hard you try. And that is why we have what it is today. But generally, I think there's been an improvement. The breaches are, diminishing, rather.
Is security one of those areas? Because, I mean, some governors did talk about how frustrated they are with security agencies who either were extorting motorists when they have those checkpoints, which is supposed to put everybody in check, or they collude with them by allowing people just to move at night on the roads.
A lot of unspeakable things have happened during the lockdowns, and that was why the easing up of the, movement took place. But there are still certain regulations in place which are still being observed in the breach. But the most important thing is to curtail, the spread of this disease. And remember that even the World Health Organization commended Nigeria for its approach to curbing this disease, which was the targeted sampling. And so far, even though the disease has spread to a lot of states, there have been, tremendous effort at making sure that it did not spread into communities, except, of course, the communities that remain recalcitrant. And these communities have been few and far between. And so far, I think these measures would continue to be observed and regulated until such a time that, the entire community is aware. It's also a function of awareness. A lot of people, just believe this is a farce. And it's unfortunate that people are dying because of that kind of belief. But there's things that governors cannot do anything about. Governors have put measures in place. States have task forces all over the country, awareness and information have been going around, but of course, you know how Nigerians behave. Sometimes people just decide on their own that, because of this seeming distrust between the leaders and the people, there is this dysfunctionality that continues, to mitigate the positive measures that are in place. So I believe, in due course, these measures will take better effect, and by then there would probably have been a vaccine, and then things would go on as normal. But of course, we have to realize, there's going to be a new normal, whether we like it or not. And people who think they would want to continue to live in denial may be victims. We're not happy about that. We're not praying for that. But there's a likelihood that there are people who will never agree that this thing exists, and certain adverse effects may befall them. But that would be unfortunate.
Well, you said there are some things that the governors can't do anything about, but perhaps there is one, and that is to define what is essential or non-essential travel, because some of the breaches that you also alluded to are as a result of whether the travel is essential or non-essential. Many VIPs travel across, borders of states, even air travel and all of that, with random abandon. So is there any way we can say, okay, how do we define, let me ask you that, how do we define, or how do governors, if you know, define what is essential or non-essential travel? Have election issues also become essential travels? Because I think that is really the major issue, because if people see their leaders travel without justification as far as the people are concerned, then they will just seem to follow the lead of the people that are leading them.
Yeah, I'll have to be sincere with you. I've had cause to discuss this with my Director General when I saw that, people were complaining about the movement of, governors from one place to another. But such movements have turned out, to be very essential. And there are times, or there were times when the president himself would invite a governor to have a conversation over one issue or another. So these are things that you cannot, stop anyway. But of course, there are other travel that have been, that can be defined as non-essential, and they have taken place. And that is because there are certain emergencies, in different parts of the country. And if you're talking about these exclusive travels that have taken place, if you're talking about governors, they have immunity and they have access to, these things. And I believe that even if they traveled without being categorized as essential travel, they also are responsible people who could observe the protocols. There are countries where, there were no lockdowns and people have traveled because, they observe, the protocols very, very properly. And
right.
I believe that people in that capacity, would be able to travel without necessarily breaching the COVID-19 protocols. But yes, like you said, people should lead by example. And when these examples are breaching, the regulations in the country, obviously the common man would think, well, if he could travel, why can't I? After all, I'm the voter. But I think the most important thing is not the travel. The most important thing is observing the protocols and making sure that you do not spread the disease. And these have, as far as the VIPs are concerned, have been observed very properly, I believe.
So are you saying now that people can actually travel if they observe the protocols? Because that's what it comes across as though you're saying.
I wouldn't say people can travel because I don't have an authority to let people travel. But I'm saying in countries where the lockdowns have not been observed, it's because people are able to stand by regulations. The lockdown, if you look at it critically, is to, compel people to abide by the protocols. I would think that if we were living in places like the Scandinavian countries, there wouldn't have been any, need to have lockdowns. Remember that there are countries that didn't have lockdowns because people followed regulations. So the most important thing is to follow the regulations. If you are, civilized enough, I would say, civilized enough to follow regulations, I think you can travel. But I don't have the authority to ask people to travel anyway.
But some other persons may interpret that as though, well, okay, if we have to we can travel by road as well, and then we'll try and observe those protocols. And so all of those interstate lockdown may not be necessarily achieving the desired effect, if people interpret it that way, don't you think?
Yes, I think so. And it would be laughable for anybody to believe that he can travel just because, okay, assuming that you go to the motor park and you are asked to be only 3 or 4 in a cab. I don't think the cab driver would want to, drive at a loss. So these are the kind of things that bring about the breaches. It's because, there are a lot of people in the informal sector of the economy whose day-to-day living. Okay, look at that. When people travel in such hordes and cannot control where they sit, do not have, these really are the kind of, vehicles that move the disease from one place to another. Assuming people would observe these protocols or the COVID-19 protocols properly, there wouldn't have been these excesses. But there are policemen all over the country who are supposed to stop these things happening. But they don't do that. A lot of them, or, the few bad eggs among them, would just rather, make economic capital of the situation. And that's unfortunate. Because if we do not have, you don't expect governors to go to the borders and start arresting people, even though they have done that in the past. And they have been able to, fish out a lot of people who are, but there haven't been any punitive measures against the few policemen who would let vehicles pass even though they know they are overloaded. And that's some of the, worrisome things on the platform of the governors. And they have called the Inspector General to make this known to him. And as you can see, not much has been done to achieve what the governors intended.
At some point, the northern governors had some meeting, and then we were told that they agreed that they had to do something about Almajiri such that they don't become a hazard to everyone else, up there. But afterwards, there were vehicles, there were trucks, they were found in different parts of the country, including down south. So was there any conversation, afterwards? Was there any resolution to say, look, they were not supposed to move that far? Or what was the thinking? How did that happen?
Let me make this clear that I do not speak for the Northern Governors Forum, but I know that at the Nigeria Governors Forum level or platform, there have been very, very intense conversations over the Almajiri problem. And these have been tackled in different ways because different governors have different perspectives about how to tackle these issues. But another area of clarity is the fact that Almajiris don't move to the south. Let's take this point clearly. The people who are moving to the south are economic, migrants. They are not Almajiris. Almajiris seek education where there is Islamic, where there are Islamic institutions. So the people moving to the south are going there to do their business. When you describe them as Almajiris, then you try to, you probably oversimplify the issue. You just assume that any young or minor from the north is an Almajiri. That's not it. There are a lot of people traveling to the south to, do some businesses. They are not necessarily Almajiris. So the Almajiri issue revolves only around the northern part of the country and does not move to the south.
Well, actually, Mr. Brakindo, we actually did have comments from those governors, because those who were found in those trucks were children, and then they were found, in fact, some states had to intercept and then turn them back. So can we actually say those ones were there to also carry out their businesses?
Well, there are communities in the north where children seek their livelihoods on their own. They don't necessarily go there. Okay, if Almajiris move to the south, what education are they going to get in the south? Are there Islamic teachers, say, in Enugu or Port Harcourt that would, camp Almajiris? I don't think so. There are a lot of children who think that they are man enough to go and look for a living. And these are the ones who believe that, there are areas in the south where certain services can be provided. And remember, a lot of these people are probably not even Nigerians. Even though, they are Hausas, they may not necessarily be Nigerians, because the, northern part of the country has open borders with certain parts, other countries from across the borders. And they migrate into this country, unfettered. So there are a lot of people who move in the name of Hausas or in the name of Fulanis who are not it. And these are the kind of people who do not even abide by our rules. If you look at the streets, for instance, in Nigeria, you will see people breaching the, traffic regulations. And that's because they are unaware and completely oblivious of these traffic regulations, because they are not the same regulations that, subsist in their, countries. Some of them come from Francophone countries, and our traffic regulations are not the same. So if you see people driving the NAPEPs and things like that around the cities, you would observe that these are not Nigerians, because they are not driving according to the Nigerian regulations. So, and these are the kind of people that also feel that the northern part of the country does not provide the kind of, opportunities that they seek, and they migrate down south. I'm not saying this is a hard fact, but these are the kind of things that you would observe when you look at the problems that we have in this country.
No, you just raised a major issue. In fact, major issues about border control and all that. I wish we had time to look into that. But let's talk about the 10th COVID-19 teleconference meeting of the NGF barely a week ago, and some of the resolutions, that came up. One of them is that, each state should come up with a modality for reopening the economy. And just this morning, the headlines have it that the federal government is warning states on reopening of schools. I mean, we have Oyo State already saying from June the 29th, Primary 6, GSS 3, SS 3 would return to school to prepare for examinations. And it begs the question, is that the modality that you or the NGF asked for?
No, like I said, the federal government ab initio had made statements about the FCT, Lagos and Ogun State. And at the platform, the NGF platform, governors decided that each state could, approach this matter according to, its perspectives. And obviously, certain states would see these things. I mean, remember that there were certain states that didn't even have any regulations. If you look at Cross River State, for instance, people were moving around very freely, and they refused to, that's probably the governor's perspective. And I think I have seen people commend Cross River State for its, its actions on the COVID-19 things. And there are certain states that have been very, very firm. If you look at Kaduna State, for instance, the governor had to go to the border between Kaduna and Abuja and, place boulders on the highway so that nobody could cross. Despite that, people brought passengers to one end of the boulder and they crossed over on foot and then took another taxi into town. So there are strict measures that are supposed to, curb, the spread of this disease. But there are also, like I said, recalcitrant Nigerians who decide that whatever measures you put in place, they're going to breach them. Now, talking about education, each state would approach education according to its, strengths and what probably the governor thinks would help, further, either economic activities, education, and, agriculture. And sometimes the committees that states set up come up with these regulations. and say, we are now ready to have, to open up in this little measure. And they have been taking this. Whether they backfire or they succeed is another issue entirely. But different states have taken these things in different ways. And I believe so far, not many have had problems with their approaches. But on the other hand, examinations and things like that, some states are afraid that, the educational calendar is being staggered, to the disadvantage of the young people who are aspiring to, further their, their prospects in school. So some of these states take actions because they believe that these schools are ready to abide by the protocols. But whether or not they succeed is another thing altogether.
Regarding the one other item there, which was rape, I mean, yes, they had that resolution when they said, well, states should have to address the relevant laws on gender-based violence. They also did recommend that they domesticate some of the child rights acts for the states that have not. So when they come up with that resolution, is it that, did they give a timeline as to when they expect states to go ahead and do that? Because some states have not for several years. They've not even touched it with a pole.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is a very unfortunate situation. The Nigeria governors were addressed by the Minister for Women Affairs, that's Dame Pauline Tallen, and she gave a very graphic picture of the kind of injury this does to the Nigerian society. I don't think any adult who is educated enough to understand, the plight of the girl child would allow his state to run without this. But there are certain other considerations, and most of them are religious. Among the states that do not probably have not domesticated these, I think about 10 of them are from the north. And I want to believe that from, the views that were stated during the last or the 10th teleconference, I think a lot of people or a lot of governors are going to face this squarely. I know that some of them have called meetings since that day, and the resolutions are yet unknown. But I believe that more states are going to maybe tackle the Child Rights Act and the Violence Against Persons Act very, very seriously. So I look forward to sincere and very serious resolution of this issue, because it's becoming another pandemic, as she described it. These issues of rape are just rearing their ugly heads all over the country, and it's really unfortunate that we are not able to protect the girl child in this country, and that's a very serious issue. But I believe, spewing from what happened in the last meeting, I believe governors are going to tackle it very, very effectively, because that was their opinion at the meeting.
You say there were religious considerations. What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, the Almajiri issue is one of those things, a lot of people, or a lot of parents, for instance, the Kaduna state government has criminalized, allowing your child to go to the Almajiri schools, or has even criminalized, being a Malam who now puts together more than 20 children that are not registered to come and, take, religious learning. And this has been part of the problems that have led to the lack of domestication of this regulation. And by the time, these twin issues are addressed properly, I think this, the rape thing and
just one moment. I just want to clear something. I'm wondering what religious considerations have got to do with the issue of gender-based violence.
Well, apart from, sincerely, this is an inexplicable, situation, but a lot of people believe that the woman should be subservient, or should, I mean, even if you look at our justice system, when a woman goes out of her home or out of her way to report the male for domestic violence, don't you see how the police address the matter? They would think it's always the woman who has a problem. Even when, obviously, the male could be. This would be either religious or cultural. And it's the same thing if a family is barren. The problem is always directed at the woman. I mean, we're going into gender issues here, but administratively, you can see that even our system does not properly encourage the woman to, be independent and express herself freely. And these are also probably enshrined in how people look at their religion. Like the man who believes that he could marry 4 wives because the religion says so. But the religion also says you can marry 4 wives if you can love all of them equally. And I think that is almost humanly impossible. But these are the considerations that lead to certain infractions that affect society. These are things that we can also not
give us a minute
address
or
administratively.
Just give us a minute or two to take a break, and when we come back, we can finish up on some of these other considerations you're bringing into the conversation. Thanks for staying with us, Mr. Barkindo. The issue you were raising, you took it on another, very interesting tangent, which is that of ethnic considerations. So we have a tripartite of sorts. There is the issue of religion, the religious considerations which you brought in, the ethnic, coloration into this whole conversation, and then that of gender-based arguments. Now, gender is a big issue, something that's of global proportion. How we domesticate all of this in Nigeria on the one hand, and in the different states. Now, that's a big argument, isn't it?
Yes, it is a big argument, and I believe that we are fortunate to begin to have, the kind of leaderships that see these arguments as, necessary. I was really amazed at the level at which the forum the Nigeria Governors Forum looked at this matter when the Minister for Women Affairs addressed them. And I think she was very passionate about it, which was one commendable thing. And the other thing is, most of the people who contributed in that meeting also addressed this issue very, very deeply and gave some of, the most touching examples in their various states of how or why, they should make rules that properly address these issues. Particularly, I think one interesting thing is that one of the main speakers was the governor of Plateau State, who felt like, even though he's a Christian, there was need, as the chairman of that forum, the Northern Governors Forum, to bring this to the table and address it. Because I remember somebody wanted to make certain comments about it, and he said, no, this is for us to tackle. And for him to say this is for us to tackle means he has taken ownership of this issue, even though he's a Christian. And that means that there is probably going forward going to be a very, very strong legislation against, the child's right, breaching the Child's Rights Act and the violence against persons regulation. And these perspectives never used to exist, because, when people can only address things against the background of where they come from and what their culture says and things like that, and they don't listen to other reasons that are coming from the other divides, it makes, solving the problem very, very difficult. But today, because of the unison in how they reasoned and how they thought and the kind of assurances that they gave to the Minister for Women Affairs, I believe that we're going to see certain improvements in legislation very soon.
Well, is that to say that you are optimistic that those other 10 states that have not even domesticated the act will do so? Because that addresses how do we convince people that that wasn't a political resolution, given those differences?
No, I was in that meeting, and it was a virtual meeting, but I saw, the depth of commitment, and I saw the kind of arguments that were advanced, and I know that based on that, governors are going to begin to be proactive in dealing with these issues. But remember, it's about time. these problems all are intertwined. You cannot solve one without touching the other. And so it makes it difficult for even states that have decided that they are going to remain within the cultural confines and continue to advance those arguments that don't address these issues are not going to succeed. Because if you are going to solve the problem of COVID-19, for instance, has made us, arrive at a new, destination. And this destination means you have to see these problems clearly and touch on them. So it's obvious that these things are going to be addressed whether we like it or not, whether the governors like it or not. And they have seen that, and they have made those statements that are not, for me, political.
Well, it's good to hear, and hopefully, who knows, we may see some of these debates in the National Assembly amending the laws to that respect, if need be anyway. But let me switch on to this other matter about the NGF also. Because, there are comments in the dailies, Rivers State Governor referring to the Nigeria Governors Forum as toothless bulldogs, and then it leaves many asking questions and wondering, well, wait a minute, he's a member of this forum. Why is he saying this? Is it that he knows they can do something and then they're not doing it? What do you think is going on?
I think on this I'd plead the fifth because it's a political issue and the NGF does not dabble into political matters. Remember, I have always told you that we have 6 core mandate areas and they don't include politics. We are a strictly policy and governance, institution. And when it comes to politics, of course, we have burnt our fingers before. And for that, we have been able to, raise or upgrade our institution to, a modern institution. Last year in 2019, I remember we didn't resume office until May. We were working from all over the world. Wherever you were, you could, function as an official of the Governors Forum through your computer. So we didn't start virtual meetings and, virtual offices today. We've been doing it since, and that is because whenever it's political time or election time, we try to avoid the office so that we don't dabble into political issues. So I'm not going to suggest anything as far as what the governor of Rivers State, His Excellency Nyesom Wike said. But I can also add quickly that the entire context of that statement revolved around the progressive governors, because that was an APC and PDP issue. It had nothing to do with the Governors Forum. But of course, like the Palestinians would say, we have the right to insult, Yasser Arafat, but you don't. So I'm not going to talk about that.
Okay, at least a good thing you didn't play the fifth when it had to do with the rape matter, so we're glad to hear that one. But could you tell us, maybe not directly the views of your position as spokesperson of NGF, maybe just on a different note on this one, but still related to the NGF or some governors. Is there any thinking whatsoever, do you think, or do you think that eventually in the future they may consider that? Because, look, if it happens to one governor, a second governor, then if they happen to be the strongest pressure group in the country, all of these actions may be chipping away at that influence that they have, and it may, in the long run, pull the rug off their feet. So do you think that maybe in the future, they may sit down and take a look at this and say, wait a minute, we may need to address this moving forward?
No, Chamberlain, I think, sincerely speaking, both, we have quite a large chunk of governors from the PDP and the APC in equal measure in the Nigeria Governors Forum. And then we have an ABGA governor. The other two parties, the APC and PDP, have their governors fora. There's a Progressive Governors Forum and the PDP Governors Forum, and they both have their chairman and spokespersons and everything. And ABGA, because of, his situation as a minority, the only governor from that party may not likely have a governors forum, but I believe they have different vehicles for addressing their political issues and differences. That has nothing to do with the Nigeria Governors Forum, actually.
Well, we have to thank you very much for the time that you've taken to speak with us this morning. We have been speaking with the head of Media and Public Affairs Nigeria Governors Forum, Abdulrazak Bello Barkindo. Thank you so much for your time.